My name is Andy Lieber, and I am with Management Concepts. Where's the click? Thank you. So we are here to talk about teaming, and the one thing I want to encourage right off is questions. So if anytime you have questions, please step up the microphone, and we will recognize you and answer that question the best that we can. Before I introduce each of the panelists, I want to just level set about teaming, because I've been told that there's some people more experienced than others in this room. And so really simply, teaming is when two or more companies come together to bid on a government procurement. And we do it basically for two reasons. Number one is to offer a best-in-class solution. Not every company can, sometimes not every company can do it all. And so we need partners in order to be able to offer that solution. And or we team to comply with the acquisition strategy. And the main message at the bottom of the slide here is that finding the right partner isn't easy. So for an example, for my company, I am working on a large opportunity with another agency. And the acquisition strategy hasn't been determined. We think it's either going to become 8A or full and open. So as a result, I've had to search for potential 8A partners. So I did a lot of research. I contacted 29 different companies. Out of that, 19 discussions. A few of the companies didn't get back to me. Of those 19 discussions, it resulted in 6 non-disclosure agreements. We were able to limit it down to a final 4 before we were able to pick 1. And this is an illustration of the complexity. It's my feeling that if we had the acquisition strategy up front, that would have been made a bit easier for us. So now I'd like to introduce Kristen, and she'll introduce herself and tell her story.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kristen Cook, and I am with Acuity. I will be providing the small business perspective here today and some insights. And I wanted to thank you, Soraya, about your point of understanding the why. My story, similar to yours, it surrounds the acquisition strategy. So as a small business, we do put a lot of effort, contrary to what most people think, we do not do everything for everyone. And we're often looking for deep capabilities to help fulfill the requirements, to fill the gaps that we have. And recently, this is in this fiscal year, we were thrilled that an opportunity came out that was larger than what we expected, but was going to come out on a track that we could compete on. And there would be fewer than 10 competitors, and we felt like we had a really good shot. Because it was so large, we knew we had some gaps in depth, and so we did a ton of research, spent many, many hours interviewing, looking out at industry to find the right partners to be able to be successful, because as a small business, the size of this procurement presented risk for us, and we wanted to be successful. So after we found our teaming partners, created the teaming agreements, and actually implemented solutioning sessions. So I don't know how much everyone understands about that, but we actually spend time solutioning. We don't just look at the requirements and respond. We figure out the right way to respond in a unique, differentiated way. And a lot of thinking goes into that. Well, the procurement came out a different track. And we were no longer able to prime. And so that was devastating for us, because we made a huge investment and we were no longer able to prime, and then our teaming agreements fell apart. And for us, we understand things change, but having some awareness before that procurement came out and understanding the rationale would have been very, very helpful. So that's a lesson learned from a small business perspective.
Very good. Stephanie?
I'm noticing my button's not on. You guys can hear me, right? Okay. Hi, I'm Stephanie Irby. I'm with CACI. I'm going to use the name that you guys probably know us more by as khaki. I just am not allowed to say it, so. So just so you know that we are the exact same company. We're a large company, so I'll give you the large perspective. We team quite often on our engagements. We work on very large procurements. So teaming is necessary for us, whether you have defined that there would be a part that would be done by a small business. For us, it's a lot of times the scale of the engagement also some of the requirements under the engagement. But in the end, our goal is really to make sure that we put forth the best team for the potential client. And so for us, we take this as a very important part of our development for an opportunity. Recent example, and recent I mean by this week as recent, I won't name the agency, but we did a lot of work with an agency for about a year and a half. When we get into an engagement, we have a methodology that we follow to make sure that we're not bidding on any and everything. One, it doesn't make your job any easier by having 50 proposals to have to evaluate, but also from us. We've talked about it already that there is an investment that is put forth for each of the companies. And so we did a year and a half worth of investment, which came down to solutioning, meeting to make sure we understood the requirements. We want to make sure we're right for you too. And we were on the track of priming the opportunity, did a lot of teaming with about 8 different teaming partners because it's just that big of an opportunity, and found out this week that it's now going small business and the RFP is about to drop in 2 weeks. So right now, we're trying to figure out which, if anyone on our team is right to be prime, and whether we have to back away from the opportunity itself. So while you guys put something out, we're just as invested as you are, and it becomes really a passion project for us. So we really don't want to be able to say no, especially if we feel like we're a really good solution for your opportunity.
Very good. Thank you. Scott.
Thanks. Scott Hastings. I'm a DHS retiree. It's good to see many of the faces in the audience. In 2006, I retired and became a partner in a consulting company, so I hear it all. And actually, it's been very instructive over the past decade to bring some of these messages that you're going to hear today to government, understand government's position, and translate them back to the companies, which is indicative of something that Soraya said that's a problem, which is there shouldn't be any reason for me to exist. So at this point, I'd love to work myself out of a job, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen. An example that we'll probably come back to later of an unintended consequence that government sometimes imposes and don't realize the impacts to industry. One of my favorites is the lift and paste of bars to entry. Many times, particularly in the smaller procurements, there is language in there that may most particularly address security requirements. It may be stipulations about the PMP level of the individuals who are going to be brought to the contract. It may be something that says, I need a secure facility accreditation. When you look at it, you wonder how it got there because it's not aligned to the requirement of the contract, and it really prevents a large percentage of people who might otherwise deliver a perfectly valid product from playing at all. And I suspect some of this is in the heat of the moment to get a procurement out. Maybe a lack of a discussion on let's double check these terms and conditions and make sure they're aligned with a specific requirement, and we're not defeating a lot of teams that could bring value to the government. So that's my example.
Very good. Before we get on to the next slide, Stephanie, I have a question I'd like to ask of you, and who else might chime in. So CACI is a very large organization, and you do a lot of teaming. Have you ever teamed with companies that did some of the same things that you do, has some of the same core competencies, and if so, why?
Absolutely. We do that quite often. One, because we do bid on very large procurements. It may just come down to resourcing. Another is making sure that we can deliver the right price. We know that every agency has budget constraints, but we also want to make sure that we are coming in with a price that will work for you as a customer. Also, the other part is while we may be in the same industry, a lot of times we're good on our own, but we're great together. And so for that, again, it always comes down to putting forth the best team that's best for the client.
Very good. Anybody else want to add to that? It's okay if you don't? Okay. All right. All right. So we talked about teaming. I think we all had stories about some of the research that we've done in order to identify the right teammates. And part of this is trying to create the dream team, the best, that will offer the best solution for the government. So there's a lot of reasons we do it, and there's a lot of things that go into it. So I'm going to start with Kristen. What's the hardest part in finding a partner?
What's the hardest part in finding a partner? I would say, can I start with the easiest part?
Sure. That's even better.
So the easiest part is really finding the capabilities. We're comfortable in industry, and companies are very good about sharing what their capabilities are, and there's a lot of mechanisms to vet those capabilities. I think the hardest part in finding a partner is finding a company that is compatible with your values and your goals. Sometimes other small businesses are looking just to win contracts and then get out, sell. Sometimes there are mission-focused companies who are interested in working with us, and they fill the gaps. Other things are looking at the financial viability of those partners, and particularly if you're in a prime-sub relationship. But ultimately, you want to be able to work with that company, and in the spirit of agility, be able to respond, be mission-focused, and work well together over the life of the contract.
Very good. And you get a point for using agility in a sense. It's a word of the moment. Okay. Stephanie, what about you? I know CACI hasn't, you share with us CACI's process. Tell us about finding partners for your organization.
Sure. Definitely, a lot of people reach out to us to sell their capabilities, so we're never at a loss of numbers of people that approach us. But we do have an internal process where small businesses will meet with us on a monthly basis. It's a very formal process, and it could be broken down by women-owned, veteran-owned, and they come in and we will tell them what we do, and then it's kind of a little bit like speed dating, but they'll give them like 5 to 10 minutes for them to pitch their ideas to us. We have a database we track, so we always have somewhere we can refer back to. There's a wealth of companies out there, and so that is, when you mentioned, Andy, about being hard, it's really trying to navigate through the numbers of companies that are out there and finding the best one. But we do always have, handfuls in each of our business groups, ones that we have key teaming relationships with that, based on certain capabilities, that will team across the federal government and have those types of relationships. But we do have a nice formal process that I think works really well.
Very good. Scott, in your role as a consultant, you work with a lot of companies, both large and small. Help us understand from your perspective working with companies what it's like to help them find the right partners.
Well, it's challenging. I got to tell you, because I've got one foot every time I take a job, one foot in the government, one foot in the company. Here's the toughest part. Understanding that the relationship and the partnership and the capabilities are all important. Many times it's very difficult when you look at the evaluation criteria to decide how you're going to build a team that can actually discriminate itself and provide that additional value that so many times government are asking for exceptional ideas, push solutions, et cetera. And then when you look at the evaluation criteria, it is really difficult to understand how you can provide that exceptional solution and get credit for it. Because although you can write it into the RFP, unless it's scored, it's not going to do you any good. And that is the hardest part, so it's kind of a 1-2 punch. It would be lovely to have a way sometime during the pendency of a procurement to go back and advise another look at sections L and M, for example, because of what you discovered in developing the solutioning, which you have just heard happens in most teaming. Ideas may come up that the government is not aware of, and should they be aware of it, they might want to incorporate that in their ability to evaluate the best solution. So if there's a way during that to modify or to add or influence the ultimate evaluation criteria, I think the government's going to benefit from that in the long run. So that would be something I would urge to get better solutions.
Good. Are there any questions? I have a long list, but most important are questions from you.
Oh, by the way, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
The techniques that some of you in this audience have used to actually have demonstrated capability during an evaluation, I think, is an incredible step forward. So it's not all bad news. I think that's if we could continue down that road to actually have visible evidence. I find most of my clients really appreciate that.
Okay, very good.
I think I have a question, if you don't mind. And it dawned on me as we were talking, I should have mentioned in my talk there, have you guys ever run into the ostensible subcontractor rule, or are you aware of what that means when you're doing your teaming? Because, you know, I talked about the limitations on subcontracting, and this rule is an old rule that goes back, so it's not new and it's not in my brief, but, you know, basically, when something like you said switches from full and open to a set-aside, and now you have to have a small prime, you can be found to be affiliated with your subcontractor if they're doing, you know, primary and vital things, or there's undue reliance. And so you can write a great proposal and say how great your team is and how great it is to have khaki as your subcontractor. But then if it gets protested, there's a risk that you'll be found to actually not be eligible because you're unduly reliant. So I'm just wondering, has that ever come across any of your competitions?
What I can say is our attorney sent out something on that actually just a month or so ago, reminding us of that. Those of you who are familiar with management concepts know we're in the training business, and that could be, it could be a risk, and he wanted us to be aware of it to make sure that as we team, we are cognizant of that and we don't put ourselves in that situation.
That would also assume that you have had the good fortune to have incorporated a sub that can now prime on your team.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions?
Really quick, you mentioned that you mentioned that you thought something was getting competed on a certain track, and then it was switched and announced last minute. One, have you noticed that as a trend on DHS? And two, was the acquisition forecast then somehow inaccurate? I mean, can you give us a sense of what you've seen at DHS?
Can I just ask you to repeat the question, because our
Yeah.
virtual attendees will not be able to hear, so please do the
Anything for you.
Sure. So the question is that we've mentioned that for some acquisitions, we thought it was going to go one way and it switched. So the question is have we seen that at DHS and how DHS does in that? As far as I'm concerned, DHS is perfect, so there aren't any issues.
Okay.
But for other agencies.
let me put it this way. Let's not score agencies, but let's just say that there's nothing as debilitating, particularly with the extended procurement cycles that we're seeing now, for many reasons, not because of the incompetence of the procurement shop, but because of budget issues, delayed decisions, et cetera. To me, a lot of procurements are extended. There's nothing more debilitating to make the money and resource investments that you've heard these folks talk about for months and months and months, pounding out agreements and negotiations with 5 or 6 teammates, and then having a switch at a point where you've got no way to recover. Let's just remember that if that's a problem that the government creates because there's been a last-minute switch, the government's going to end up hiring their own problem. They've created a situation where they're not going to get the best teams. The government is not taking advantage of the months of solutioning that has happened and the new ideas. And so I think that really needs to be weighed when that kind of decision faces government in terms of pros, cons, and ROI.
And sometimes when the acquisition strategy switches or it's indeterminate, we recognize that there's discussions going on with the government about which way it should go. And it's difficult sometimes because they want to inform industry what's coming up, but they know that the program wants one thing, contracts wants another, and it takes a while for those discussions to happen. So we understand that, but we've also expressed the results of that.
Information is great.
Yes, yes. And please step up to the mic.
So, I think I can talk loud enough. Is there a point
It's because the folks, hang on, it's because the people on virtual can't hear you. Here you go, I'm coming to you. I was coming to you.
Oh, sorry. Is there a point in the acquisition upon which you would wish that would be the final time there would ever be an announcement of that the strategy is going to change?
Yes.
Or a recommendation as to, you know, if we're 60 days out, 30 days out, 120, something that is,
18 months out.
that would be helpful guidance?
Yeah.
No, I'd say, I mean, it really not 2 weeks before something's going to drop, but I mean, we can recover within 60 to 90 days. It's still tough because some of these negotiations do take a while, but yeah, definitely as early as possible. And to be honest, if you believe that it was going to be one particular way, whether it was a small business or a full and open, or you don't know, just be honest. Just let us know, and then we will potentially start working 2 different avenues. And this way we'll be able to be set no matter which way it comes out.
If I could chime in, that's exactly what I was going to say, that sometimes when we're uncertain, we just need to tell you we're uncertain and what we're exploring. So at least you know what the options are.
Exactly. So we've mentioned a few times about negotiation, and this is something a question I haven't pre-populated with the panelists. When you're negotiating, what are you negotiating on?
Work share, work streams.
Explain what you mean by work share and work streams.
Work stream, depending on the type of engagement you're in, are they going to be in a specific swim lane or percentage of business? Could be percentage of people that they're going to have on the engagement or size of the deal. So if it's 10%, and again, that may be dictated to us depending on the procurement itself.
Yeah.
And that's from the large side, but I think it would be interesting to get the small business perspective too.
I just want to define swim lanes for a second, just to make sure we're all on the same page. So when there's a procurement that has a number of different task areas, we refer those as swim lanes, so that a company would handle this particular swim lane and would be the primary on that. Go ahead.
Yeah, and so that's basically our process, is we look at the statement of work, we look at the different task areas, and we score ourselves. And then we look for where those gaps are, and then that's where the teaming partners come in. It is challenging as a prime within the small business rules, where we have to do 51%. So we try to be as meticulous as possible about the work that we can do and the kinds of people that we have, so that we can find the right partners to fill in those gaps.
And bear in mind that this is partially driven by your requirements. An example I'll just talk about, a lot of the negotiation could be impacted by whether the suspicion is that it's a low price, technically acceptable requirement. The negotiation gets a lot tougher, and it may be negotiations that do not redound well for the quality of the team that addresses the requirement. So if you want to go low, that's great, we get it. Just recognize, please, what that does to the requirements that you're getting, and don't say we're going low, and by the way, we want really creative ideas and new ways of doing business. So there are a lot of things that drive those negotiations, some of which are really tough.
So has anybody ever experienced where they've done the research, found the company, go to negotiations, and it breaks down in negotiations and you almost have to start over again?
That happens often with us as a small business, because it's very difficult to come to terms on the pricing strategy. We, in terms of our rate structure and labor categories, are generally lower because we have lower overhead and wrap rates. So it's difficult, if you find those expert niche partners or large businesses, for them to meet our rates. So that's generally where the negotiations break down for us after we've identified a company and their capabilities.
Just keep in mind that the title of that, Create the Dream Team, looks different from the government side than it does the private sector side. The dream team for my clients is the team that can win the job. That may not be the same dream team. The dream team for the government is the team that can deliver the best kind of capability and drive the mission the best. The ideal is that when government communicates with industry, creates the right evaluation criteria to get what they're really after from a mission-driven standpoint, then the dream team can be crafted around results rather than something that might be less of a plus for government.
So that leads to another question. You formed the team. The RFP still hasn't come out yet. How do you communicate the value of the team, either pre-procurement or in the proposal? What types of steps do you take?
Well, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say no. One, we'd love to be able to come in and talk with the program offices and be able to discuss the team itself. But we would have done our homework prior to that, just kind of evaluating capabilities or the experience of individuals or the company itself. So that's something important, that we have these open dialogues of being able to discuss. The other is a lot of times we'll do white papers and combine our knowledge and expertise and co-develop these white papers that will also communicate the team.
From our perspective as a small, we are thrilled with the market research and the uptick that we're seeing, especially within DHS. Yeah. So market research, RFIs, all of those things enable us to get closer to a solid set of requirements that we know we can deliver on. So it ties back to Scott's comment earlier. As we're solutioning and thinking about these RFI responses, that enables us to have further dialogue with the government, with the program, with acquisitions even, to talk about the solution, our ideas, and that gets refined over time so that when the actual procurement document comes out, it's much more refined and industry is in concert with those requirements.
Very good. I think we have a question over here.
Yeah, just wanted to maybe get some feedback around, past performance. I know we struggle sometimes in the evaluation area, making sure that we're really hitting the right past performance sort of metrics and evaluation when it comes to, the teaming partners. Can you talk a little bit about maybe any tools or lessons learned that you guys have seen in terms of when you're in that teaming stage, either trying to validate to a partner's past performance or trying to sort of vet that and see how it would play in terms of the evaluation?
Yeah, this is one of my favorites. You put something in the small business category, looking for, by definition, I think, you're looking for a small business not to necessarily be able to deliver on everything, but create the kind of teaming arrangements that gets the brightest and the best back to the dream team. And then you only score the experience of the prime. It's just, it's beyond crazy to me that you've asked somebody to go out and with a rationale to put together the best team possible, and they're not able to present the best case for winning that job. So that's number one on my checklist.
We've also seen situations from SBA's perspective where the solicitation says they'll consider the past performance of the joint venture entity itself, but not of the two companies that have been doing the work for 30 years that make up the joint venture itself.
Right.
And so, we've tried to change our rules to say you can't do that. There's legislation that says that. It's not yet in the FAR, but it seems like sometimes we're making it much harder on ourselves than we need to.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think also in parallel with the key personnel requirements. So not oftentimes, we have seen cases where there are 4 to 6 key personnel requirements, and they all have to come from the prime. And in many cases, when we're pulling teams together, we're pulling experts in the field, and oftentimes are not part of our company, but a partner. And for us, that's the dream team. But again, what's being scored is having those key personnel as full-time employees of the company at the time of proposal submission. So that's a challenge for us.
And by the way, here's a trend to add to that. There's a rational level of the number of key personnel that you can ask for in an agile IDIQ, for example. At the point that you ask for a dozen key personnel on a small business requirement, I think there's a message there that's not healthy. So I'll throw that in the mix.
Very good. So in terms of finding partners, this may come as a shock to all of you, but when we look at partners, especially if we're in the prime position, all the subs will tell us how great they are and how the customer loves them and that they do great work. How do you go about validating what a potential partner tells you so they make it to your next stage?
Yeah, for us, a lot of it is just making sure that you kind of check within your network or the communities that you're in to validate that the person who has been talking about their company or an individual, those are accurate. So if a company's putting forth a person to be on the key personnel, you want to validate that that person, in fact, is actually liked. Many people in the private sector come from the public sector and often think when they leave that they are loved, and many get a rude awakening, unfortunately, when those doors do not open to them when they come back. So really, I think it's working the network and making sure in maybe the professional organizations that you're in fact getting the right information about these companies.
Yeah, for us, it's equally as important, and this is through experience where teammates have told us that they had very high CPARS ratings, for example, and the CPARS ratings weren't so high, or there were some content in there that wasn't favorable. So we often, again, it's within, working within the network and, looking at researching in industry, that sort of thing. So, but it's an important fact, you must validate.
If I can add something on there, I'm actually a former Fed myself, so I've been in a program office. Shouldn't be a surprise. And I've actually had to evaluate companies before. And so my recommendation, and again, because I've done private sector and federal experience, is please be honest. Don't kid. If the company is not really doing a good job, please provide that, because it does impact, when it comes to tying it back to teaming, it does impact us when we're doing our research to see whether they're a viable company or not. So yeah, it's tough to give bad messages, but it's really important for them to improve and be able to receive that, and then also to make sure when we are putting these dream teams together, they in fact are a dream team.
And has anyone ever asked a government employee about a particular company? I didn't say with any agency to find out. I know I have.
There's another great reason for a consultant.
Yeah. No, I have, and you don't have to say anything bad. You just don't have to say anything good.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
That is one factor of the network.
Yeah, and that's part of using your network. Because obviously we want to offer the right solution, and we don't want to come up with a company that hasn't performed well. And in fact, that leads to another thing, is that let's talk about performance, especially as a prime. How important is it to you to perform well and make sure that your partners do? Yeah. Go ahead.
It's huge.
I just want to
we're a large publicly held company.
I want to make sure we get to the next slide.
Yeah, we will.
Yeah, no, for us, it's huge. I mean, that's the most important thing, because we don't get any future business by performing badly at any agency.
Yeah.
And as a small business, every engagement counts, and you want to over-deliver.
Yeah.
So.
Right, and having I'll speak from my experience. Sometimes subcontractors will complain that they didn't get the business they expected. And there's problems on both sides, but sometimes the subcontractor is not offering the personnel and the skill set that you need to do the job. And so that's something you have to be very careful about.
I would think that it would be extremely important on the performance side, even from your private industry reputation, because you don't want to have, from an industry perspective, because you guys do work with one another, hearing that the government was dissatisfied with you, right? Because the government is the one that's public with their comments.
Yeah, exactly.
One thing we've actually instituted, in addition to the performance requirements that are in the statement of work or the PRS, is an independent assessment that we do quarterly, because there could be perceptions that the government sees that our PMs or folks on the ground aren't seeing. So we actually, to mitigate that risk, have instituted that program so that we can continue to make sure we are performing and our subcontractors are performing.
Very good. Okay, so this is Scott's favorite slide here. As you see with the title, is that, we're here to give our viewpoints on where might be able to help have better teaming relationships. So Scott, I'll turn it over to you.
So here's a spread of notional issues or points that we came together as a team and felt like if you had to pick a few, here's ones that are the most disruptive to our ability to put together good teams. And they're not to point a finger at flaws on your side. It's just sometimes just it looks a lot different from this side, believe me. As a retiree, I learned a lot. And I was one of the CIOs that actually, like Luke, spent a lot of time dealing with the people that were going to make me successful. So this is some of our best thinking. We'd love to get some reactions from you or tell you kind of why we think these things are important and maybe some more specifics about what might be done. We've already covered a number of them. Clearly, the don't change the game without communicating with us is just huge. Evaluation criteria is huge. Dialogue is huge. If one thing I could tell, actually this is going to sound like the old guy remembering the good old days. How many years ago was it that the Mythbusters memos came out from OMB? Mm-hmm. To me, I like to pull those out every 6 months and reread them. I think there was a lot of value there in demystifying the FAR, and Soraya covered this a lot. Don't tell me about the FAR. There's a lot of room between those four corners, and it took me a long time to learn that. So that would be one thing that I would say that's particularly relevant to the dialogue with the government. One other small thing, now that we have Ken sitting here, you made slight reference to contract teaming arrangements. To me, those aren't JVs. To me, they relieve you of some of the percentage kind of problems in putting together a small team. I don't see many of those being, I don't know if government has to ask for those as part of the acquisition strategy, but in looking at those as an alternative for teams to form for small business, it seemed like that offers some interesting options. So I just throw that out there as something that people might look at to offer another alternative.
Yeah, I mean, for us, teaming is either joint venturing or prime sub. Someone's got to be the prime. It's either one company or a joint venture. But I think some of the problem here is that the delay in getting it from the legislation to our rule and to the FAR, it's not in the FAR yet. So most CEOs are not going to follow the changes until it's actually in the clause, because right now they're using the old
So is
clause.
CTA interchangeable with joint venture? Is that what?
It depends. I mean, sometimes those are actually seem more like prime sub relationship where there's someone in charge. They're the one getting paid directly, and they're the ones who dish things out.
But they all have privity to the government, which is one of the appealing things to me.
You're talking more like the GSA type of model, which I'm not sure what that is. We have a lot of trouble dealing with how we would, someone has to be the prime. They're either a prime or not, and if they're the prime, can some of the primes be large and some be small, and how do we give out the credit for that? We have some concerns with the way GSA does some of the stuff they do.
Ah, okay.
Honestly.
I'm not going to pull it back yet, though.
Yeah, well, they don't always listen to us either. I can assure you.
You're kidding.
I can assure you.
I'm sorry to monopolize the time.
No, that's okay. Pardon? So one of the things that we have on here is requirements and outcomes that the government wants. How does that help with establishing teaming arrangements, understanding what they are?
I mean, that's the core of the work, right?
Yeah.
The statement of work, and you want to be able, as a team, the dream team, to be able to fully perform all of those, but also in a differentiated way, whether you're creating cost efficiencies, you're impacting the speed to mission, that's what you ultimately want to do. So those are the sort of the statement of work requirements. One of the questions that I have as a small business focuses on requirements that are not necessarily built into the evaluation criteria, but something like proximity of your facility. Sometimes it's 5 miles, sometimes it's 10 miles. And as a small business, we don't have multiple offices around. And so, again, it's more about the communication. Why do you need that 5 miles? Why isn't it 10 miles? Why isn't it 15? So just understanding that, was that just pulled from the previous procurement as a standard? Just understanding something like that impacts a small business's ability to put in a bid and respond.
And I think from any size business, when you see something has to be 5 miles away, 10 miles away, you want, your first question is it wired for somebody else? when it's like that. I think there's a question over here.
Yeah, I have two questions. One, you talked a little bit about, multiple meetings and a lot of work going into these. Can you say a little bit more in terms of the time, the resources, the cost associated? Is there a way that you calculate it of this is the amount of the bid, we're going to spend this much on putting teaming arrangements together, things like that. And then the other question is, from either a small, mid-tier, or large perspective, can you comment on the importance or impact to your company of either being a prime or a sub?
Thank you for that second question, because that's actually something we really haven't talked about. I think I want to answer your first question because I've spent a lot of time doing that. Did I set out with the budget in terms of time on what it was going to take? No, I did not. It was, I need to find the right 8A partner in my, for this particular thing. And I did some research. I started from using GovWin, which is a database that a lot of us in industry use to forecast opportunities, but they have an FPDS feed to identify under this NAICS code what companies sold to this particular agency. I went through that. I did a lot of web research to come up with these 30-plus companies that I had to identify. And then it was reaching out to them. And it was very surprising to me how some companies that I reached out to didn't respond back. Maybe those companies weren't in business anymore. I do not know. And at least we had, some good discussions. We only had one company that I didn't think treated us very well in our discussions. But it was, you have a task to do and you go do it. And sometimes you get lucky, you find the right company on the first try. And sometimes it takes a lot of calls and a lot of emails in order to do that. I don't know if anyone's experience is different.
I was going to say about the building and the cost to a company. Ours is very formal. We call it a bid and proposal process, where we will determine the amount of money it will cost us to actually bid on the opportunity and then put a proposal together. So there is a methodology behind. And the dollars vary. It depends on the size of the deal, but it's not unheard of that we spend over $1 million on an opportunity. And the cost is coming down to the physical people doing the work, in addition to whether we have to purchase things and if we're going to be building something out as a prototype.
So does that include finding the companies as part of your B&P cost? Finding the partners?
Sure. And keep in mind, this is a defined and set-aside budget for a particular proposal in most companies. Right. So there's clearly a cost. And if there's not if it's a trouble procurement in terms of fits and starts and changes, yes, the company loses that money. Honestly, eventually, the government's going to pay for it somewhere. I mean, it costs everyone money to not get this right. So I just want to make that point.
And so let's address the second question, which is an important question for both the small and the large businesses. Please talk about your approach to teaming as a prime and as a sub, and some of the different things that you look for.
Well, the one thing I think that I'm going to refer back to our company's culture. Starting as a small, again, the work that we do in the federal government, it's risky, right? As a small business, you don't have a lot of resources. You need to get it right. So our CEO, who's a single owner, generally wants to prime everything that we do because, I'm being perfectly honest. We have a core set of capabilities. We're focused on those capabilities, but we want to maintain control and we want to manage risk and we want to be responsible for that delivery. I think when you are a subcontractor, that risk increases. So that's been our mantra to date.
I would echo that. Again, we have been a sub to smaller businesses and also larger businesses. And for us, it's a lot of times reputation. If the prime is not performing on the engagement itself, and similar, we would like to prime everything.
So
we want it all within our control.
Yeah, all the control.
Has there ever been instances where you chose to be a sub, and if so, why?
Well, definitely we've chosen because we may not be the right to lead that opportunity, and it very well may be the core competencies don't lie with us. It really lies with the smaller. So in those cases, those are easy decisions to make.
And there are, I'm going to be really frank here, there are a lot of reasons why I see this a fair amount where two larger companies or two smaller companies of kind of equal value will come together to increase their chances of winning. One maybe because it was an incumbent or because they have experience, whatever. And there will, it's not uncommon at all for them to change places, depending on kind of the more subtle personal things. Let's say the company that was going to prime loses a position in DHS or protests in another mission area. There's going to be a calculation, rightly or wrongly, that maybe they're not the ones to be in the driver's seat. It has nothing to do with their ability to meet the requirements, et cetera. But there's a lot of, I'm just bringing that out as an example of how much is at stake in terms of how companies have to put themselves together to satisfy the government requirements. There's a lot to it. It's very expensive. And I guess my concern is, at the end of the day, I'm loving to help my clients win the work. Honestly, it's hard to get out of the public service mode and not want the best assets to be employed to help the government move forward. Soraya and Luke, you always incorporate that in what you say, that this is about the mission. So there's a lot of it on our side that's economically driven. But on the other hand, there's a lot of commitment anybody offering in the federal space to get this right. Just just one thing about requirements, just back to requirements. You can stand up the executives on an industry day and articulate as much as you want about what you want out of this procurement. If it's not in the evaluation, it doesn't mean anything. And so if you're really committed, I'm talking not to the procurement officials now as much as I am the program owners. If you don't have the energy and the commitment to what you want to get out of that, to the extent that you can find it in how the procurement is being evaluated, then you're subject to other decisions that are going to be made based on things that aren't going to give you what you want. So I get it that a lot of this is directed, I guess, at the procurement shop. I did see some operators here. I want to challenge you to be aggressive and assertive customers, and I think you heard that from Soraya earlier as well. I know that that's what I was as a client of procurement. You got to do that. So requirements is going to get you outcome. Don't just speak them. Incorporate them in what you're trying to acquire.
Thank you, Scott. One thing I just want to add about teaming, about prime sub. It's very important for the companies to take a realistic, and I mean realistic, view of your core competencies and the procurement to decide where you best fit. So at another agency, there's a large procurement in which what we do is actually a small part. So while we would like to prime, it doesn't make sense, but we also know that we can articulate a clear value-added role based on our past performance and our skill set, where we would be an in-demand sub. And that's also important, because you have to understand a lot of times, and the hardest thing for companies is taking a realistic look on your position. We always use the phrase, you don't want to be drinking your own bathwater. Some companies actually believe the stuff they put out on their brochures. So So you really have to have a realistic look and have the data to back up, so that when you present yourself, especially as a sub, you're very targeted and say, this is what we can do, and here's why, and this is what we want to be focused on. And as you talk to companies who are interested in being subs, if you want to give them some advice, I would say be very targeted. Anybody have anything else to add about that? Okay. So we've talked about a number of different things. You mentioned about the security requirements, right, as one of the non-factors, or do you want to add that?
You're talking about the facility?
Yeah, the
Okay.
facility clearance, yeah.
So as a small business, when there's a facility security, we personally have one, but I think that is a discriminator for other small businesses who do not have one. So it's a required investment for them. So that's always, again, we understand that there is information that requires this and work that requires this, but again, we just ask to consider that when new procurements are coming out. But the certifications and the EODs, this goes back to teaming.
Yeah.
A lot of times we will team with larger companies or bring in team members so that we have the bandwidth and the folks that are already EOD'd so that we can deliver on a team on day one. Again, because we understand the mission, we don't want there to be any kind of break in service, and we want to be able to hit the ground running. So that is another rationale. So if you see some of our responses where it looks like, wow, you have a lot of team members. In some cases, it's so that we have those badged resources to be able to deliver.
Okay.
I've also heard or seen situations where you have to have a clearance to get a contract, but you can't get a clearance unless you have a contract.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Is that still the rule in the law?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, I just, it's a riddle, I guess, I just don't get it. Maybe one day I will. Yeah, it's very frustrating, I'm sure.
Okay. Any other questions from the audience? Yes. We got one online. Very good.
Thank you.
All
I
right.
promise it's the last one. So something I've heard from industry, from mid-tier companies, is that they're often not an attractive teaming partner as a sub. And part of the reason is that a large company doesn't, or to a large company, they don't get credit for it. Agree, disagree, or situations when, that may be the case?
Yes. It's, one of the first questions, a lot of times we ask when we're talking with people in searching a procurement, we get the name of the person and they say, oh, I have a small company, and it's like, oh, what's your category, right? Want to know if they're 8A, SDV, OSB, and a lot of times I'll have conversations with small businesses and I'll say, are you an 8A? Are you an SDV, OSB? Before we even get into it, talk about capabilities.
But she's asking, she's asking about mid-tier.
Mid-tier, no, I understand that. We're a mid-tier company. We are large by government definition. And so it just depends on where you are in that niche and how you can articulate your capabilities to make that case on why you should be there.
So from a small business, mid-tiers like this type of a company that has a niche area of expertise is very valuable for us because they'll bring that depth of expertise. So from a small business perspective, we're already filling the small business goals. Mid-tiers are great because they're bringing that depth of expertise. I think that the challenge is for larger businesses, is there any value?
Me personally, I have not had any issues with that. It tends to be large to large that we have the harder time, but that's because we all want to be in charge.
So we got a question from our online audience. So not just for this panel, if there's any industry in here that want to answer it, we have a mic for you.
Okay, so here's a question, or it was for the incentive panel. Does industry have a perspective on commercial service determination applicability? For example, IT solutions that are commercial services in the general marketplace, but the government's environment is not wholly capable of implementing the commercial application and therefore must be tailored, e.g. tailored because of IT security requirements.
Any takers from industry? No pain points there for commercial item determination? Or commercial item?
I mean, those aren't going to change, right? The security requirements for
I thought I saw somebody else raise their hand back here for a question earlier. I don't know that. Yes.
I'll come your way.
I've been hearing a lot more complaints lately from small business subcontractors as well as just some individuals regarding recompetes and their incumbents not allowing them to change teams or change companies for a recompete because they've signed non-compete agreements. Could you talk a little bit about your experience dealing with non-compete agreements, and do you think they're becoming more and more common lately, or I'm just oddly fielding a bunch of questions about them?
So I just want to make sure that we understand the question. So there's an existing team in place. It's recompeted, so the size standards aren't changing at all, and that the prime the prime wants to change teammates.
No, the subcontractors want to change the prime.
The subcontractor. Okay, so the subcontractors want to change primes, and they want to join a new team for the recompete, and the existing prime doesn't want them to change. Okay.
And it's probably built into their subcontract.
If you signed that teaming agreement as a subcontractor, you need to hire a consultant to help you with the next one.
Or a better attorney.
Now, having said that, I have experienced when I was in government a number of closed-door conversations where they'll pressure you when you're not even contractually obligated. The counsel I would have is that's a dangerous game to start playing. It's not going to pay off for you as the individual trying to manipulate the sub, and it's not good business. It's going to get known, and it's not going to help you. But it does occur. So don't get into a bad contract, and if you're someone trying to do that, the government does not look upon that kindly.
Well, isn't there the continuity of services clause?
Sorry?
I was going to say, and also companies need to look at those no-compete agreements very closely, because some of them are not actually legal. I have heard that from some companies.
Right.
We have a question back here.
Hi, I'm from industry as well, and I just wanted to maybe further answer your question. Oftentimes, a prime, it's not that they can't let you out to recompete on the new one because your agreement will be for the existing work. So if you want to recompete on a different team, you can, but what the prime sometimes does is say, well, you're no longer on my current program, so that's your risk. If you want to move to a different prime than the current work you have, I'm not going to have you on my team anymore. So for any teammate, large or small or medium, that's a very difficult scenario, and you don't want to give away your revenue. So it's just very tricky, and that does happen.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, back here. Please step up to a mic or.
So earlier it was made mention of like trying to maybe change or give suggestions about sections L and M. So when a draft solicitation is released, do you see that as a tool that you can use to make suggestions on section L and M? And how, when you've made suggestions, have they been perceived by the procurement office?
So I can answer that. We have done that. So in cases where the evaluation criteria focuses solely on the prime, we have asked that question and referenced the section as part of the Q&A, and we have seen success in alleviating that requirement to allow for our team's past performance to be evaluated.
But in another sense, if I can jump in, it's not, that Q&A is not, to me, an effective way of helping the government to consider that they might get a better result by re-examining what they're evaluating. And I got to say, a big part of this in the IT world, the procurement cycles when I was doing it were long enough to be able to run a procurement and still kind of get the best of the solution sets that are out there, even if it took a year. The technology horizons now are a matter of months. And so I think really the government needs to take a look at how can the private sector influence you to achieve the best result at a moment in time. And 6 months could make a difference in this. In a formal Q&A, in the formal process, companies are really loath to inform other companies about what's out there. Because as soon as you do that, you lose your competitive edge. And frankly, it's all about being able to compete with the best solution, not being able to provide everybody with the best solution so that it becomes a non-competitive issue for you. So if there's a way to have communications that will inform the government where certain information is at least preserved competitively, that would be a wonderful way for the government not to worry about if it takes 16 months to do something that I'm not going to get the right answer. Soraya, do you have any ideas?
Oh, very few. No, just kidding.
I thought I had that off.
No, but I was going to comment on the fact that that goes back to understanding the market, the right time to ask industry about what are the discriminators, how do you differentiate from one another is during that RFI process as you're building the RFP, and then putting out that draft and putting out that sections L&M along with B and C together so that industry has the total picture and can come back. Because oftentimes you guys will be honest in the draft phase and say, this is how you distinguish us. This is how you tell what's a good company, what's a not so good company, and what product really will work for you or not.
Again, the RFI, and you heard it earlier, we really commend you guys for reaching out the way you do with the market surveys, with the demonstration projects, the pilot projects where companies are allowed to come in and build something so you can look at it. There's still an issue of what happens to that information after you receive it, how broadly is it disseminated. I guess I wonder if there are additional ways, and not to add to your workload burden, but again, talking to the operators. There are ways, I think, to have sessions around technology areas. So, for example, biometrics in general, where it's not necessarily a specific CBP or CIS activity, where you might get some support from third parties and create a free and open discussion around what's the solution set look like, where not 400 companies show up, but there's and I'm not talking about an act kind of thing or any of those kinds of things, but some way to get 20 companies to come in who are recognized leaders in the field to have that kind of discussion. I think if the operators could get involved in that as prep to how to construct what they, it would be a good pulse point for them if it could be done with alacrity and in an organized fashion.
We call those acquisition innovation roundtables. You should have been here this morning. You missed it.
I knew that. No.
There's a question back over here.
Good afternoon. Quick question. You've talked a lot about the teaming process. Can you tie it specifically to the acquisition timeline? In other words, when do you lock in your teaming partners, and how does that impact whether it's an APFS announcement, an RFI, RFP, et cetera, and the implications to industry with specific announcements? Again, I know we've talked vehicles and some socioeconomic set-asides, but in terms of the acquisition milestones, what do you look at and when do you act?
That's a good question. I think we all probably have similar and different answers. So I'll start with Stephanie in the middle, see what she has to say.
Yeah, and again, it depends. We prefer to be in front of an opportunity at least 18 months before before an RFP comes out. So there's a lot of lead time in there for us to kind of we call them gate reviews, but really kind of internalize and look at whether the opportunity is still something we're looking to pursue. So we'll be meeting with people in the very beginning of that process to see if there's any gap areas or other companies that we just would like to team with. But we try to lock them down at least 90 days before something comes out. And when I mean lock it down, that means all your teaming agreements are signed, negotiated, and if you're going to enter into an agreement after that, it's something that has popped up that you were unaware of that changed. So we'd like to do that very little, but again, try to be about 90 days before something hits the street.
Yeah, but once we know about something, we are thinking about what it's going to be and sort of start the search process for partners. Did you want to?
Yeah, and so we use the APFS system within DHS to do that, to drive what we call our pipeline, and that is 18 months out. So we are looking at the opportunity. We're trying to have conversations with the customer. We're learning about best practices in industry as we formulate our team. again, we also do our teaming agreements as probably 60 to 90 days in advance. However, because of some of the changes in the acquisition strategy, we often have a clause in there that it is subject to the final acquisition, because it may be a different acquisition strategy, it may be a different scope of work, and that sort of thing. So that's the general timeline.
If you can imagine the options you have, and that every significant public option, meaning we get more information about the procurement, is a point that they're going to reassess everything from the solutioning to the teaming. So to the extent that you, for example, decide to put out a draft RFP, that's an event that will drive their decision making. So there's your procurement schedule and our decisions about how to address it are very closely interwoven. And I think you can think every time you open up the doors to provide us another glimpse into the acquisition, whether it's information or a formal event, that's when a reassessment is going to happen in that gating process.
Okay. Any other questions?
Fair.
Absolutely.
Okay, I guess there are no more questions. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you.